What is this, a high school reunion for ghetto girls? That cheap dress and that attitude? You look ridiculous." In a packed Richmond courtroom, Officer James Dale spat those words at a black woman he thought was just another nobody. He dragged her like a puppet through the crowd, trying to humiliate her. But he had no idea she was Evelyn Bell, a federal agent holding the file that could destroy him. When the law is used to humiliate instead of protect, who does justice serve? What state are you in? Where you live, is justice blind or just bought? The trial of Officer James Dale for assault charges was underway at the Richmond courthouse. Tension spread through the room like the scent of gunpowder. The prosecution's files stacked half a meter high. Reporters crowded the hallway, camera shutters clicking like rain on cold steel. The public gallery was packed. Latecomers leaned against the walls, following every word as if witnessing an execution. Everyone knew this was no ordinary trial. This was a symbolic case, either to prove the system could still feel shame, or to bury one more victim beneath layers of legal dust. And amid the sea of people, a figure entered unnoticed. Evelyn Bell. No one called her name. No one waved her to a seat. She wore no badge, carried no file, no briefcase. Just a small crossbody bag, an orange blouse that didn't scream for attention but stood out among a sea of black suits. Her hair was neatly tied back. No makeup. She walked slowly, step by step, as if measuring the room's breadth. He chose a seat in the back row, the kind reserved for the forgotten. No one knew who she was. No one asked. Her hand rested on her bag strap, motionless. Her eyes didn't rise to the bench nor fall to the floor. She looked sideways, quietly observing the room while remaining invisible. For some unexplained reason, a few people began to turn and look. They didn't know her, but her presence made them uncomfortable, or simply uneasy. James Dale noticed her. For a split second, his eyes stalled. A man who had faced down countless adversaries, who had silenced witnesses and lawyers alike, now paused at the sight of a silent woman. Though he'd never met her, something felt off, out of place, out of role. But he did what he always did, turned discomfort into mockery. "A black woman dares to step forward and testify against me?" he muttered in resentment. He stood, adjusted his tie, and turned to the judge with a voice half mucking, half arrogant. "So we're letting file clerks sit in court now? No dress code anymore?" The room fell silent. A few chuckled. Some stared at their feet, but not Evelyn. She didn't move, didn't react, only her eyes locked on James Dale. Not defiant, not angry, just watching, like she was waiting for him to expose himself. The crowded courtroom turned to look at Evelyn, curious, suspicious, or just puzzled. But she didn't lower her head, didn't turn away, didn't flinch like most do when shamed in public. Evelyn simply looked straight at James, a gaze that seemed to slow the room's collective breath. It wasn't trembling or furious or rushed. It didn't scream resistance, but in it was the one thing James couldn't bear: knowledge. She knew who he was, what he had done, knew more than the lawyers, the judge, the scribbling journalists, and that made him feel naked. James stepped half a pace back. His lips twitched, as if to speak, then held the words. He glanced around, saw that people were now watching him, no longer laughing. He snapped, "I'm talking to you. Who gave you clearance? Are you a lawyer? You know this is a criminal court, right?" His voice rose, trying to regain control through volume, power, intimidation, his usual tools. But Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was a refusal to play by his rules. The air began to freeze. A court clerk glanced toward Judge Hollowell, the old man behind the bench, his face cold as marble. The look was a silent plea. Should we step in? But Hollowell didn't move, didn't nod, didn't shake his head, didn't even look at Evelyn, as if he agreed, as if James had the right to act this way, or worse, as if he had expected it all along. James moved forward, his face tightened, his wrist twitched. "I'm asking you to leave. No one invited you." He raised his hand, no longer a gesture. No longer a question, it was an act of violation, blunt and unmistakably threatening. His hand reached toward Evelyn, ready to pull her from her seat like he had done with those he thought he could control. But Evelyn slowly pulled a phone from her coat pocket. No rush, No aggression, no words. She turned on the front camera. The light from the screen lit half her face. No makeup, no fear, a calm, cold action, like placing a mirror between them. James froze, not because of the camera, but because he didn't understand why he suddenly felt so seen. The room went silent, as if the air itself was watching him. Evelyn didn't break her gaze, didn't smile, didn't explain, and when their eyes met, in the dim glow of that screen, only one of them realized they had just chosen the wrong person. The atmosphere in the courtroom seemed to freeze after that look, but James Dale wasn't the kind to back down just because of a glance. He needed to dominate, to crush, to win, just like he had done to hundreds of others who had entered this courtroom. And this time, the silence drove him mad. He growled, no longer sarcastic but openly hostile. "I don't have time for this nonsense." Without waiting for anyone to react, he leaned down, quick, precise, and unexpected, grabbed Evelyn Bell by the collar of her orange shirt and yanked hard, as if to pull her out of her seat without a single word more. The act came without warning, not by police, not by a bailiff, no court order. Just a man with a gun and a uniform using force on an unarmed black woman in a room full of people, and no one did anything. A chair was scraped from the public seating area. A woman stood up abruptly, then immediately sat back down. A young lawyer gripped his briefcase tightly, his eyes darting from James to the judge, then to Evelyn, but he said nothing. The clerk near the judge's bench looked up, about to speak, but Judge Hollowell's glance stopped her before a word could be uttered. And Hollowell, still seated, flipping through files, his eyes never leaving the page, as if what had just happened was a blurred note in the transcript. No reprimand, no gavel strike, not even a "Officer Dale." That's enough. His silence was no longer negligence. It had taken the shape of complicity. James still clutched Evelyn's collar. He didn't pull harder, perhaps surprised that she wasn't resisting. Evelyn didn't slap his hand away, didn't rise up, didn't scream, "Let go." She simply sat there, letting her collar crumple under the hand of her humiliator. Her eyes stayed locked on him, as if her very stillness was an invisible slap. And in that moment, it was James who was exposed. Something began to shift in the room. A discomfort spread, not because Evelyn didn't fight back, but because people were starting to realize they too had done nothing. A man accused of assault was committing another assault right in court, and everyone just watched. Evelyn's powerlessness or the silence of the entire system. Which was more terrifying? James felt it. He looked around, searching for a sympathetic gaze. There was none. No one laughed. No one nodded. No one stood by him. The dominance he had enjoyed all his life had turned into isolation, and the one who exposed him didn't lay a finger on him. Just a woman sitting still, letting him indict himself. The moment James Dale held on to Evelyn Bell's collar lasted no more than 5 seconds, but to everyone in that courtroom, it stretched longer than an entire hearing. He hadn't expected her to sit still like that. No grabbing, no yelling, no visible outrage or injury. None of the theatrics he was used to handling. Just her gaze, cold, deep, and hollow, as if it pierced right through his uniform, through the badges, through the shell of a system that had shielded him for years. And the camera light up front still rolled, reflecting off the wrinkled collar, the stiff hand of James, and the heavy breathing in the room. Evelyn looked directly at him and asked a question. Soft, clear, no bitterness, no emphasis. "Are you sure you're handling the right person?" The entire courtroom fell dead silent. No gavel, not even a breath of wind. The question didn't carry the tone of defiance. It wasn't thrown to provoke or rally. It was like a tiny blade slicing through the heavy fabric of the law and striking at James Dale's deepest fear, not knowing who he was really up against. A court officer jolted up, as if on instinct to intervene, but before he could step forward, his colleague grabbed his arm, not with force, but with a look that said, "Don't, not yet." No one wanted to act before knowing which side would prevail. In rooms like this, right and wrong didn't come from truth, but from the mouth of the one who held power to declare the outcome. James let go, his hand left behind a crease on Evelyn's collar, and he himself felt it, as a stain, not on the shirt, but on the very uniform he wore. He no longer smiled, no longer spoke. He simply returned to his seat, laid his hands on the wooden desk. But his fingers weren't still. They tapped, lightly, without rhythm, without beat, an unconscious attempt to shake off the feeling of being pulled down from a throne of power. No one spoke. But the air in the courtroom had shifted. No one looked at Evelyn as an outsider anymore. They began to look at her as if she might be someone. Some scribbled in notebooks. Others just sat still, eyes fixed on the wrinkled collar and James Dale's trembling hand. Judge Hollowell still said nothing, but for the first time he wasn't reading papers. He was looking directly at Evelyn, a look with no answer. That day, no one shouted, no one fought, no one was escorted out. But the entire system began to crack just from a tug on a shirt, an unflinching stare, and a question no one dared to answer. That night, the rain wasn't heavy, but it was relentless. It streaked down the living room window, where Evelyn and her mother sat in silence. No one said a word. The wall clock neared 1 a.m., but the time, since her father had been escorted into the patrol car, stretched endlessly. Southside, Richmond, was no stranger to sirens or the sound of feet pounding the pavement in the middle of the night. This was the first time it had taken someone without giving them back. Her father, a history teacher at the local middle school, was arrested for disturbing the peace after trying to break up a white student attacking a black classmate in front of the school gates. The last to arrive, but the first to write the report, James Dale, a newly transferred officer 3 months on the job. Evelyn listened as her mother recounted every detail. Dale hadn't asked a single question. He went with his gut, a gut that always assumed the black man was the threat. He forced a nearby student to sign a statement claiming the man charged in yelling and assaulting an officer. There was no video. The school gate camera had conveniently failed that day. Her father was still in his chalk-stained dress shirt when they took him. He didn't resist, but they cuffed him in front of his students and co-workers. The trial lasted only a morning. The court-appointed attorney didn't challenge a single testimony. No witnesses called, no motions for delay or investigation. Dale stood at the witness stand, reciting each word as if rehearsed. The defendant disrupted order, refused to cooperate, showed signs of resisting an officer. The judge nodded. 6 months in jail, no bail. In his final 3 months, her father was no longer called by name, but by number, 241 and 59. He didn't write, didn't call. Evelyn saw him only once, behind a glass partition, 19 days after his incarceration. His face had grown gaunt, his eyes sunken. He didn't blame anyone. He only asked, "Is your mother okay?" She didn't speak. She nodded, and that was the last time she saw him alive. The day the news came, a prison staff member said he was involved in an altercation and had been severely injured, but there were no medical records, no surveillance footage, no one held accountable. All they sent back was a bag, a cracked spine history book, a worn leather watch, and a letter, never mailed. In it, he wrote, "Believe in what's right, no matter how twisted it gets." After the funeral, Evelyn spent the night in her room, staring at the charge sheet. She read it over and over, each line cold, each phrase clinical, as if describing a malfunctioning machine, not her father. Disturbance, non-compliant behavior, failure to follow orders. None of it ever described the man she knew. She folded the paper, didn't cry, didn't scream, just thought, back then, I didn't know what the truth was. I only knew it wasn't in that report. Since her father's death, Evelyn Bell hadn't lashed out, didn't wail for justice like the characters in the movies she once watched. She just went quiet, as if all the sound inside her had been shut off. Throughout high school, she spoke little, didn't socialize, didn't join drama club, sports, or student council. She studied, silently, steadily, expressionless. Her mother worried, told her she should let go to move on. But Evelyn didn't need to let go. She needed to understand. Understand why a good man died doing the right thing. Understand how a false statement could kill. Understand how the justice system could bend toward the powerful and still wear the robe of law. She chose to study law, but not to become a lawyer. She wanted to learn how the system protects itself. She researched cases of manipulated evidence, reviewed internal investigations, and built models of the legal process to find its weak points. Evelyn didn't seek to accuse, she sought the leaks, the cracks where justice got replaced. Graduating near the top of her class, she was offered a job at a major D.C. law firm. The starting salary was enough to let her mother retire. But Evelyn declined. Instead, she applied to the office of the Inspector General at the Department of Justice, the unit that investigates misconduct within federal agencies, especially abuses of power by law enforcement. At first, she was only assigned to old files. But she didn't complain. Every sentence she read, every testimony she rechecked, they were all pieces of a larger puzzle. And over nearly a decade, the name James Dale surfaced 3 times, in 3 different states. No case ever ended with a conviction, but all followed the same pattern: inconsistent witnesses, broken cameras, black defendants, and Dale as the first to write the report. Evelyn began tracking him, not in person but through internal memos, withdrawn complaints, insufficient evidence, investigations. She saw that he didn't hide his wrongdoing. He learned to make wrong look legal. He knew when the mic was off, when to let someone scream into the dark, and he'd never been held accountable. 7 years passed. Evelyn quietly stacked her files until one new complaint from Richmond surfaced, accusing Dale of assaulting a black teenager. The case was dismissed for lack of evidence, but this time, Evelyn knew the moment had come. She volunteered to investigate Richmond's police and court network. To do it, she had to erase herself, remove her personnel file, delete her system access, leave behind her official identity, and become no one. She lived under an alias, rented a small room on the city's west side, and tracked every move of Dale, Hollowell, and those behind them, alone. No legal support, no privileges, no shield. It wasn't out of bravery. It was the choice of someone who'd lost everything to silence. And this time she would make silence echo. She wrote in her journal, a line meant for no one but herself, "I'm not seeking justice for my father. I'm seeking justice for those he no longer has the chance to protect." The Richmond courthouse stands in the heart of the city center, wrapped in mirrored glass on all 4 sides, with a bronze plaque at its front engraved with the words, "Justice, Equality, Constitution." But no one calls it a house of justice. Among legal professionals, it goes by another name, the No Appeal Court. It means this: if you lose here, don't expect to win on appeal, because every file, every testimony, every piece of evidence has already been subtly distorted, just enough to ensure there's nothing left to salvage. Judge Hollowell is the unspoken symbol of this place. Once a professor of constitutional law, honored by 3 universities and even nominated once for the federal appellate bench, he declined, citing his wish to serve the community where I was raised. A noble choice, until people realized that Richmond was no longer a community, it was his personal kingdom. Every veteran attorney here knows, if you want to practice law in peace, stay away from civil rights cases, and never let a case land on Hollowell's docket. He rules swiftly, wielding the law with such fluency it borders on numbness. He doesn't need to shout or pound the gavel. A single glance, a precisely timed question, or flipping a file at just the right moment, these are enough to bring the entire courtroom in line. But his power doesn't come from the law. It comes from fear. The fear that if you displease him, your career will end. Not with a bang, but with a silent halt needing no justification. The only person ever seen beside him in sensitive cases is Officer James Dale. Dale doesn't shine on paper, doesn't rise through ranks quickly, doesn't show up in the media, but he is always the first at the scene. He is always the first to file a report, and his reports always match the court's final judgment, word for word. They don't record internal meetings. No transcripts are kept. Dale never submits drafts. Everything he turns in is polished, seamless, leaving no trace. If something seems off, Hollowell takes immediate action using expedited procedures, dismissals on technical errors, or closed hearings to protect involved parties. What's called legal process is merely a shell, used more to shield complicity than to defend truth. Evelyn uncovered this after 3 months of internal work, when she stumbled across an old, unencrypted report. It listed 43 civil rights lawsuits dismissed in the past 4 years. 31 were presided over by Hollowell, and, most telling of all, 26 had James Dale as the initial investigating officer. Not a single one was successfully appealed. No witness was ever called a second time. No one ever dared to ask why. That system doesn't need to lie. It only needs to follow procedure. A procedure carefully designed so no one realizes what they're being robbed of. To Evelyn, every figure in that chart represented a father, a mother, a child who once entered the courtroom with hope, only to leave with a red stamp across their case file. Dismissed, no grounds for reconsideration. She wrote a line in her black ink investigation journal. In Richmond, justice isn't lost. It's kept in a place no one's allowed to reach. Richmond's court didn't just have a powerful judge and a cleanup specialist officer. It had a network of collaborators, silent, loyal, carefully selected. Every courtroom clerk was recommended by a special subcommittee. Interpreters, especially for defendants who didn't speak English, came from a single list, managed by the judge's office. Even newly assigned prosecutors went through an unofficial orientation. No documents, no recordings, but everyone understood clearly. Don't overstep the system's boundaries. Evelyn didn't discover this from some secret file, but from a coincidence. She saw a civil rights case number RCV 14382, labeled as internally resolved. But when she searched for the physical file, the drawer was empty. No papers, no deposition transcripts, just one code and a line, no storage required. Curious, she checked 20 other random cases from the same year. 8 had no data left in the federal system. A nameless IT specialist later confessed, yes, there was tampering, but not from the court level. It had to come from state-level access or higher. She knew she had to go deeper. Evelyn applied for a temporary clerical job. No contract, no name badge, no network access. Her role was to organize paper files and deliver internal memos to different courtrooms. A ghost job, but one that allowed her to pass through every corridor, hear things no one paid attention to. Then one afternoon, while delivering documents to the waiting room on the 3rd floor, she overheard James Dale's voice through a thin wall. That girl still hasn't withdrawn the case. Typical East End type. Stubborn as hell. Hollowell's voice came next, low and curt. Handle it quickly before it reaches the media. Her mom already sued the police, now it's her turn. We can't let this become precedent, Dale asked. You want me to do it the usual way? Hollowell replied. No, this time it has to be cleaner. Evelyn said nothing. She simply turned on the voice recorder on her phone and left it quietly in her coat pocket. This was the first solid evidence, a direct confirmation that Dale and Hollowell were coordinating to interfere in the case. She didn't know the girl's name, but she knew this was what she needed. That night, Evelyn went home and connected her phone to a separate hard drive, but when she opened the folder, the entire audio file had been erased. No error message, no trace. The hard drive had auto-set its backup settings, something that could only happen if someone accessed it using a root account. Evelyn froze. There was no longer any doubt. Someone in the system knew she was getting too close. She didn't report it, didn't file a complaint. She simply halted all activity for 3 days. Total silence. She needed to think, to understand that her enemy not only manipulates justice, but can erase your memory of it. Evelyn rewrote the conversation from memory by hand, not on a computer, not uploaded online. She taped the page beneath her desk drawer, where no one would think a clerical temp would hide evidence, because she understood in this place, where voices are taught to go silent before they even speak, every sound must be hidden in places the powerful never bother to look. No one shouts in Richmond court. because here voices are trained to be silent before they're ever raised. The courtroom, after the collar-pulling incident, seemed to return to its usual rhythm. James Dale was back in his seat, tapping lightly on the wooden table as if the earlier event had been nothing more than a minor hiccup in a tense workday. Judge Hollowell bent over his files. No one brought it up again, and no one questioned what had clearly been a breach of conduct. The courtroom felt programmed to forget the hand that had just grabbed a woman by the collar, to forget those eyes, to forget the question that had thickened the air like a storm waiting to erupt. But Evelyn did not forget. She sat still for 3 more minutes. Then, just as a new witness was being called, Evelyn stood. No unnecessary motion, no warning. She simply stepped out of her row and walked toward the center desk, where the attorneys and prosecution stood. Her voice rang out. For the first time that day, "I request permission to present evidence." No one reacted right away. No one stopped her. Even Hollowell, the man whose carefully orchestrated script Evelyn was now disrupting, merely furrowed his brows, his hand hovering over the gavel. He neither nodded nor shook his head. He assumed she was just another stubborn witness trying to defend herself before being removed. He assumed this was a desperate act after public humiliation. He assumed wrong. Evelyn pulled a phone from her inner coat pocket, an older model with a privacy shield on the back. She walked to the presentation podium and plugged a cable into the courtroom's speaker system, a port normally reserved for official exhibits. A soft beep sounded. The room went still. The first voice to play was James Dale's, low, lazy, tinged with contempt. "Want me to do it the same way as before?" Then came Hollowell's, colder. "No, this time it has to be cleaner." Dale again. "Send a rejection notice to the court, and I'll erase its name from the system." 3 sentences. That was all it took to shift the room from doubt to horror. One by one, people turned to stare at the judge. He sat frozen, as if a mask had just been torn from his face in public, and he hadn't yet figured out how to respond. James leapt up. His mouth moved wordlessly, his eyes wild. No longer a commanding officer. No longer the man in charge. He was now the one exposed, not by fists, but by his own voice. A few people in the audience pulled out their phones and started recording. Some didn't dare face forward, simply aiming their cameras at the audio source. The defense attorney leaned toward his assistant and whispered, his expression shifting from doubt to calculation. Evelyn said nothing more. She stood silently at the podium, her hand resting lightly on the phone as if holding a blade she could no longer hide. She didn't look at Dale. She didn't look at Hollowell. She looked at the people in the gallery, the ones who had sat in silence all morning, waiting for a fair trial. No one spoke, but no one saw her as just a witness anymore. "He's lying. That's fake. That recording isn't admissible," James Dale screamed, his voice fractured and completely unrestrained. His face flushed red, eyes darting like a man trying to escape a burning room. He rushed toward Evelyn as if to snatch the phone, to erase every trace of what had just betrayed him. But Evelyn didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket again. Out came a deep blue identification badge. She held it up in front of the judge and the entire room. Her voice was calm, not loud, but sharp enough to reach every corner. "I am Evelyn Bell, investigator from the Office of the Inspector General, U.S. Department of Justice. Authorization Code 2179K. I am conducting a covert investigation into judicial manipulation at this site." The room fell deathly silent. James froze, as though he'd just slammed into an invisible wall. His eyes blinked rapidly, his hand still suspended midair, then slowly retracted as if scorched. At that moment, Judge Hollowell was no longer a symbol of power. He looked at the federal ID, offering no rebuttal, no objection, no gavel strike. He merely blinked once, slowly, as though witnessing a conclusion that had just been rewritten from the beginning. The courtroom erupted into 1,000 chain reactions. A reporter in the last row jumped up, gripping his camera and whispering, "Send this to the newsroom now." Another pulled out a phone and hit record, wearing a shocked, almost frightened smile. A court staffer ripped out his earpiece and turned his handheld camera toward Evelyn, mouthing her name in an attempt to verify. At the prosecution's bench, a legal assistant keyed the ID code into a tablet. 7 seconds later, verification confirmed. Active federal investigator, undercover. Evelyn said nothing else. She didn't need to. The entire room had turned into a hearing larger than any indictment, one where power itself was on trial. People no longer looked at her as a witness. They saw the person who had led the system into its own trap, and now the trap had sprung shut. James backed into his chair, shoulders hunched as if fearing eye contact. Judge Hollowell leaned on his desk, tapping his finger, not steady, not certain. Everyone who had once controlled that room now sat still, awaiting a verdict that was no longer theirs to declare. Evelyn placed the phone down on the desk beside the badge. Not as a threat, but as a declaration. She no longer had to hide anything. She was not a witness. She was the evidence. "This is not a trial for James Dale," Evelyn said, her voice cold as ice, eyes scanning the room. "This is a trial to measure just how much this system trembles when it faces the truth." The 7th floor of apartment complex 11A, west corner of Richmond, was a place no one came to unless they absolutely had to. The elevator had been broken for 3 years. The hallway walls were blotched with damp mold, and the fluorescent lights flickered every time it rained. The last apartment on the left, no nameplate, no mailbox, a door streaked in peeling gray paint, was where Evelyn Bell had lived for over a year. No one recalled seeing her come or go. No neighbor knew her real name. And that was exactly how she designed her life, invisible. Inside, everything was arranged with a cold precision. A low wooden bed frame with no headboard. A desk built from old plywood with varnish worn off. A steel file cabinet without an external lock, because it was rigged with fingerprint access and an encrypted passcode integrated directly into the mechanism. On the desk, 3 military-grade hard drives sat in anti-magnetic casings. A router lined with lead and signal blockers. She never brought anything home via network connection. All data was manually transferred and only encrypted after integrity checks. The walls were double-layered with soundproofing. The front door was secured by a mechanical bolt, a fingerprint scanner, and a voice recognition system wired from the inside. Evelyn didn't trust digital recorders. She hand-wrote her investigative journal each night, short entries, then incinerated the old one 48 hours later, if already archived into the distribution system. She didn't just store evidence. She distributed it through 3 separate channels. One copy was encrypted with the SHA-256 protocol and sent to an independent investigative journalism group in New York via a middleman who didn't know her real name. The second copy was split into separate file formats, deeply encrypted, and uploaded to an international distributed blockchain system, where no one could delete all the data once it entered the chain. The final copy was a physical USB drive sent every 3 months to the Office of the Inspector General in Washington via a secure diplomatic pouch. Each time she sent it, she kept no original, only a verification hash to track retrieval. No single place held the complete data. No one, not even Head, could fully manipulate the evidence once the process began. The only thing she could do was protect each link until truth found its own exit. She sat on the floor, back against the wall, eyes fixed on the faint glow from a sinking hard drive. Outside, Richmond remained loud, with car horns, hallway arguments, and footsteps that came and went. But inside this room, there was only her, the authentication codes, and voices waiting for the right moment to speak. In one rushed final line of her journal before tearing it apart, Evelyn wrote, "I don't keep the evidence. I'm just the last person to place it in the right hands." In the soundproofed room on the 7th floor, Evelyn sat at her desk, headphones on, eyes locked on a monochrome screen displaying file hashes. She didn't need visuals, only the sound was enough. A woman's voice played, shaky, the voice of a mother. "They said my son brought it on himself, but he's 12. 12. I begged them to reopen the case. They said it was closed, no further access. Evelyn froze. That mother had filed 3 formal complaints and denied all 3. No lawyer took the case. The official reason? Insufficient basis to sue a public agency. The next clip was a male officer, southern accent, rough but trembling. I didn't write that line. They told me to mark suspect showed resistance, even though the kid just sat there holding his head. I was scared of losing my job. I'm sorry. Evelyn had once tried to contact him. The email bounced back. The phone line was dead. He vanished or went silent, like most people in her files. Another clip featured a court clerk, an older woman, anonymous. I was forced to delete 2 transcripts from the archive. They said it was duplicate data, but I entered it. I know it wasn't. Evelyn jotted each detail quickly. File hash, recording date, sender, content summary. She had grown used to listening for hours without emotion, but sometimes her hand clutched the mouse so tightly her knuckles turned white, not from pain, but from helplessness, against a system that knew how to twist justice with just a few lines of redaction. Her list of victims numbered 17. She had full names, case IDs, denial dates, contact details, or former ones. Some had moved out of state, some were missing from the system, some were marked not accepting new communication. Evelyn had tried calling 3. Only one answered, a woman. She said just one thing, "Thank you, but I stopped believing in what's right a long time ago." Then she hung up. She played a clip marked high priority. At first, only static. Then came Hollowell's voice, calm and firm. "No one wants this getting loud. The cost isn't just a lawsuit. It's the entire credibility of the state." The other voice was unnamed, but Evelyn knew it. Marcus Langston, the current Attorney General of Virginia. In a later segment, he said, "I don't care who that kid is. If this blows up, the state's budget gets frozen. Clean it up." A pause, then Hollowell chuckled softly. "The same as before?" Evelyn stopped. She logged the audio under emergency response, a list that would auto-backup and encrypt within 30 minutes if no cancellation command was issued. She wasn't surprised, but the confirmation clenched her chest. This wasn't about Dale or Hollowell anymore. This was a higher level of power, where justice was bought with political language, campaign money, and conditional silence. In that small room, between cold hard drives and a dim yellow light, Evelyn typed the final line of her pending internal report. Justice is not killed by enemies. It dies slowly through nods in the dark. The meeting room was located deep within the second basement level of the Department of Justice headquarters, a windowless area, unmarked by signs, inaccessible without triple-layered access codes. Inside the room, no bigger than a modest studio apartment, sat 3 people facing one another. A senior inspector with a weathered face unaccustomed to smiling, a cybersecurity engineer with one earpiece tilted and eyes that never lingered more than 3 seconds, and Evelyn Bell, her hair neatly tied back, wearing a gray shirt, hands folded precisely on the table, as if preparing to read a formal indictment against an entire system. There were no introductions, no oaths, just one short sentence from the senior inspector. Richmond is leaking. Leaking trust, leaking ethics, leaking even federal legal oversight. 3 civil rights lawsuits had been closed in just 8 weeks, without notice, rebuttal, or appeal. An anonymous letter had been sent to the Attorney General, containing only 2 lines. "Richmond Court is a graveyard for justice. Dig deep if you dare." The meeting was convened immediately afterward. Evelyn didn't ask many questions. She simply nodded when assigned to conduct a fully independent investigation outside the jurisdiction of any local government body, including the regional FBI office. She would not use her real name nor disclose her position. If exposed, the department would deny any connection. If she failed, no one would come to retrieve her. "Your code name is Ebony 17. the cybersecurity engineer said as he slid a handheld encryption device across the table. Ebony was the classification reserved for investigations into racially motivated civil rights violations. 17 was her sequence number among covert agents activated since the beginning of the year. Whenever Evelyn submitted data, the system would display only 2 lines. Source, E17, classification, sensitivity level 3. No one knew who was behind it. No one could access the files without 3-stage authentication from Washington. The preparation process began within 72 hours. Evelyn was removed from the federal personnel database, her access to benefits, health care, payroll, and identity records suspended as if she had never existed. Her new identity was built upon a real individual who had died in an accident 3 years earlier, far enough to avoid suspicion, close enough to match existing rental and bank data. There were no surveillance escorts, no legal support teams, no safety lines. Everything had to be arranged by Evelyn herself. Her housing, transportation, communication networks, data collection methods, and evidence distribution. Every risk was personal. Every mistake left no return path. There were no firm handshakes at the end of the meeting, no congratulatory emails, no shiny nameplates added to a hallway wall like in the movies. Evelyn simply stood, nodded once, took the encryption device, and walked out, like an invisible courier carrying the final letter that the system had yet to dare write. In the cold concrete hallway, she told herself, if this is a war, I don't need an army. I just need to know where to aim. Evelyn did not walk into courthouses or police stations through the front door. She wore no wigs, planted no bugs beneath anyone's desk. Instead, she entered through doors no one noticed. The doors used by people no one noticed. She befriended a records archivist who handled hundreds of files a day, yet no one knew her name. She enlisted a network technician who regularly reset the system at month's end to create a hidden replica of the storage server. She brought coffee every morning to a freelance typist, once reprimanded for misspelling a defendant's name, though in truth she had refused to correct a falsified transcript prepared by Dale. Evelyn didn't seek allies among the righteous. She found them among the betrayed, those who had once believed in the system and were chewed up by it. Like the young law graduate who interned at the judge's office, fired for questioning a document that listed 2 contradictory timestamps. He told Evelyn, his voice hushed as if someone were still listening, I don't want to be a lawyer anymore, but if you need someone who types fast and remembers the names of all the victims, or Valerie, the system's technician. She held no formal title, no one remembered when she'd started working, but she was always the last to inspect the server before every internal update. Evelyn discovered that Valerie had quietly backed up every log file before they were wiped. When asked why, Valerie gave a dry smile. They think I don't know how to hide a copy, so I leave a decoy where they expect it and keep the real one where they'll never check, inside the old printer on the ground floor. Evelyn's network wasn't large, but it was scattered, quiet, precise, and untraceable. Each person believed they were helping someone on the inside. No one knew her real name. No one knew she was an investigator, but they trusted her, not out of idealism, but because they too had been betrayed. And now, all they needed was someone who wouldn't pretend anymore. But not everyone she approached stood with her. One person, a file transport driver who moved documents between storage facilities, initially seemed very cooperative. He detailed how records were swapped, how deletion orders came in at midnight. But one day, inside a packet Evelyn received, she found a tiny tracking device embedded in the folder's spine. The model matched those used by the state's internal surveillance network, accessible only to Dale or Hollowell's office. Evelyn said nothing. She asked no questions. She simply marked his name on her double-faced list and restructured her entire data transfer route. She felt no anger, no disappointment. In a war like this, betrayal was a given. Trust was the luxury. In a single-line message sent to headquarters, she wrote, I didn't enter the system. I seeped into it, like ink through paper, slow, deep, and impossible to erase. Judge Leonard Givens was not a rebel. He was composed, proper, and regarded as one of the few upright pillars left in the Eastern judicial system. After nearly 2 decades on the bench, he had never faced serious opposition until he began raising questions about the Richmond court. Specifically, the alarming number of civil rights cases is quietly dismissed. He requested an internal audit, proposed a comparative review of Judge Hollowell's summary rulings against neighboring states. That request was never answered in writing, but he got a reply, swift, precise, and impossible to resist. Less than 3 weeks later, Givens's office was audited 3 consecutive times over allegations of misusing office funds for personal purposes. A professional development expense for a Harvard seminar the previous year, already approved and reimbursed, was suddenly dragged into review. A former staffer who'd left for medical reasons resurfaced with a complaint about authoritarian management culture. No one defended him. No one pushed back. 3 weeks after that, Givens resigned for health reasons and vanished from the legal system as if he'd never existed. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew. It was Hollowell, not directly, not in writing, but through the network. He didn't need to threaten anyone. The system did it for him. Efficiently, invisibly, and with frightening legality. Any attorney who mentioned his name more than 3 times in a filing would see their client withdraw without explanation. A journalist who tried to dig into one of his rulings had their sponsorships revoked, then got reassigned to cover local news briefs. A courthouse staffer who questioned the case log was transferred within 3 days to a department with no desk. Evelyn followed all of it. Not through gossip, but through data. She built a network diagram, with Hollowell's name at the center, but no arrow pointing directly to him, only dashed lines. A former classmate, now state legal advisor, a nephew managing the court's budget, a real estate partner who happened to fund a statewide legal conference. None of them ever defended him publicly. They didn't need to. They just needed to keep things quiet. She understood. With someone like Hollowell, the most dangerous tool wasn't power, it was unspoken compliance. He didn't have to give orders. He only needed people to know what happened when you didn't obey, and over time, people learn to avoid instead of confront. That's how corrupt systems protect their center, not with law, but with silent consent. Evelyn wasn't angry. She simply wrote down 7 lines, the last known traces of Givens in the system before his name was erased. She read them once, then closed her notebook. He asked. No one answered. Then I won't ask either. I'll make them speak. Evelyn never deluded herself that a single recording or a statistical chart could take Hollowell down. Others had believed they held enough proof and quietly disappeared. She understood. With men like him, evidence was just the surface. To bring down the roots, she needed an explosion. Big, public, and impossible to manage behind closed doors. She found it in a case file no one spoke of anymore. A civil suit from 5 years ago, marked internal confidential, never made public, no appeal, no judge's name listed. But Evelyn tracked the lead through a technician's voice note. The suit involved a court administrator who once worked under Hollowell, someone who had filed an internal report alleging evidence tampering in civil rights hearings. The system marked the case as withdrawn for personal reasons. But Evelyn uncovered a draft of an appeal never sent, recovered from an old hard drive Valerie, a network technician, had salvaged from a broken server. In the draft, the plaintiff, named Marcia Deeds, wrote that she had been forced to alter at least 8 trial records under verbal orders from superiors, and when she refused, was threatened with investigation for abuse of data access. Marcia was no longer in Richmond. Evelyn tracked her to another state, living under a new name. Their call lasted 17 minutes. Marcia stayed silent for the first 14. Then she spoke 3 sentences. I don't want to be involved again. But if you really work for the department, bring this out the right way. I used to believe in the courts. That was the biggest mistake of my life. Evelyn decided to reopen the file, not through local courts, but via the federal system. She filed a new appeal under the name of a civil rights watchdog organization she was covertly linked to. All documents were legal. All evidence is traceable. And most importantly, the witness summons named Hollowell. No one could ignore it. If he declined to appear, he had to provide a reason, and that reason would be public. If he showed up, he'd have to testify. And that was where Evelyn set her trap, because this time there were no closed doors, no internal session. The trial would be held in the Eastern District Federal Court, open to the press and legal oversight. She knew this was the threshold. Once she filed, there was no turning back. Someone would uncover her true role. Someone would retaliate. But she also knew this was the only moment she could force him into the light without the lights going out halfway through. Evelyn inserted the USB drive containing the original evidence into her secure machine. As the last file uploaded to the federal system, she hit submit without lifting her head. Her spine was straight, her pulse was calm, and in the quietest moment, she whispered, "To touch someone untouchable, first you have to pull him out of his safe zone and make him step onto the witness stand." Mayfair Hotel wasn't the kind of place that hosted public events. There were no banners, no reporters, no guests outside the pre-approved list. That evening, the Sapphire Hall wing glowed with clinking glasses, bursts of laughter, and conversations that would never appear in official political records. State Attorney General Marcus Langston's cocktail party was billed as a post-campaign gathering, but everyone knew the truth. This was where influence was brokered, where power was distilled through wine and silent agreements. Evelyn Bell entered under her new identity, communications assistant for a small NGO focused on community legal education. Her hair was dyed chestnut brown, loosely pinned at the nape. She wore gold-rimmed glasses, a charcoal evening dress, pointed heels, and a name tag printed in italic with no logo. No one recognized the woman who had once faced James Dale in court, and no one could have guessed that the court's pendant around her neck was transmitting audio signals to an encrypted receiver stashed on the 7th floor of an old West Side building. The party was lively but controlled. Wine flowed steadily. Waiters moved like shadows. Men in dark suits and women in formal gowns spoke just above a whisper, but no one needed to be cautious. This was a safe space. Everyone in the room was of the same order: senior attorneys, legal fund managers, mid-level judges, and 3 politicians eyeing state senate seats. Evelyn didn't try to eavesdrop. She just stayed near the bar area, where people ignored those who poured wine or carried pastry trays. Langston's voice rose first, smooth, confident, with the cadence of someone who had pitched donors for over 2 decades. He was speaking to a salt-and-pepper-haired man Evelyn recognized as the president of the Virginia Bar Association. "Dale still holding up?" Langston asked, swirling his cocktail, eyes scanning the room like checking for open ears. The man smirked and replied, "As long as Hollowell stays put, everything stays on track." Evelyn barely blinked. Langston chuckled softly, tone unfiltered. "I just freed up another chunk from the Southbridge court sponsor. They understand the value of judicial stability. No one wants the media poking around where silence is needed." Evelyn kept her expression neutral, as if listening to a dessert menu, but inside every word felt embossed in the air. Dale's name, Hollowell's. The phrase judicial stability. This wasn't small talk. It was the clearest summary yet of the entire manipulative mechanism she'd been chasing for a year. The pieces were aligning. No cameras, no coerced statements this time, just their own words. The microphone hidden in her pendant captured every voice within a 2-meter radius. The signal was encrypted instantly and transmitted back to the 7th floor receiver using a short-range encoding system Evelyn had spent 4 months building to avoid traceability. 1 copy was stored on her USB drive. A 2nd copy synced with a distributed encryption network. She wasn't just recording, she was triggering a chain reaction, and they had no idea. Langston was the kind of man who didn't bother hiding when he believed the room was sealed with reputation. He moved from group to group like a stage director, every word calculated to feel just intimate enough, just commanding enough. Those around him laughed, raised glasses, and nodded. Everything he said felt familiar, as though he wasn't speaking but issuing declarations of stability. Evelyn stood on the outer ring of that circle, eyes locked on her shimmering glass, ears wide open. She knew exactly who was who had been tried in Hollowell's court, who had accepted lobbying funds, and who had quietly withdrawn a complaint when Dale appeared in the report. But what she needed tonight wasn't names, it was links. And Langston, like a confident alpha predator, started revealing connections he'd usually never dare utter aloud. When a young politician, a newly elected state rep from Monroe County, nervously raised a question about recent criticism surrounding the Richmond court, the room dipped a beat in tension. Langston didn't snap. He just smiled, the smile of a man who had survived 4 terms. "You're young. You don't get it yet. This system doesn't run on what's right. It survives on silence, greased at the right moments." The others around him fell quiet. A few smirked. But Evelyn recorded every word, not in memory, but in live, encrypted signals ticking with every syllable. She quietly stepped back from the core group, moving like someone stepping out to take a call. No one noticed. She slipped through a side hallway, down the emergency exit leading to the lower parking deck. No cameras, no guards, no signal interference. She got into her rented sedan, a gray one with out-of-state plates, and activated the backup system. 3 recordings synced successfully. One sent to an independent press server in New York. One encoded into a blockchain transmission through a decentralized IP, and one saved locally to her hard drive. Offline, trace-free. She didn't smile, didn't exhale in relief, just sat in stillness for a few minutes in the dark. The sounds of the party above still murmured through the concrete ceiling, laughter, clinking glasses, and power congratulating itself through repetition. But something had shifted, not because of a speech, but because of one moment of carelessness by a man who thought he was untouchable. The powerful never fear the light until they realize they've been monologuing in a room with a recorder. Evelyn buckled her seatbelt. She didn't look back at the hotel. She had what she needed. Now it was time to make what she heard into something no one could pretend never happened. The 3rd floor of the Richmond courthouse is always quiet after official court hours. No public, no defendants, only legal staff moving between record rooms and administrative offices. At the center of the hallway leading to the sealed courtroom stands a bronze statue of Lady Justice, nearly 1.5 meters tall, sword in the right hand, scales slightly tilted to the left, blindfolded as an eternal promise of impartiality. But one early week afternoon, that very statue began transmitting a signal. A technician from the security division noticed a strange interference while checking the internal network signals. The interference came from an unknown device, not listed on any equipment schematic. He traced the frequency to the statue. Removing the hilt of the sword, he uncovered a micro camera, expertly camouflaged and positioned directly facing the door to Judge Hollowell's office. The motion sensor had been continuously triggered for the past 3 weeks. Panic didn't erupt immediately. It seeped quietly through closed-door meetings. The internal security team was ordered to sweep the entire hallway, all courtrooms, electrical boxes, and ventilation shafts. The camera was sealed, and a classified report was sent to the State Judicial Operations Office. A special investigation team from within the system was formed within just 12 hours. For Evelyn, the news arrived hours before it hit official channels, not through the press or the office, but from a long embedded network. A former technician who had once been wrongly disciplined for accidentally recording a meeting between Dale and Hollowell. Evelyn had helped him retain his certification. He hadn't forgotten. And when the alarm system was triggered, he texted her just 2 words: Hive cracked. She didn't panic, but she knew this was a turning point. The camera inside the sword hilt wasn't just a recording device. It had captured Dale directly speaking to a whistleblower outside the courtroom, and Hollowell removing a file from a sealed cabinet. It was visual evidence, something no paper trail could replicate. But one portion hadn't been transmitted in time: the last 5 minutes of Friday's footage. Footage Evelyn hadn't encrypted or distributed yet. If the security team managed to decode that segment, they would know who she was. If they couldn't, they would still understand someone had placed eyes at the very heart of power, and that alone was enough to trigger retaliation. Evelyn sat in her 7th-floor apartment, Lights off, eyes fixed on the device status screen. A blinking red line read, "Device disconnected, possibility of seizure 97%. Her hand rested on the table, where a secondary encryption drive sat. She had already extracted a copy of the footage. But sending it now would be a declaration of open war. She knew the hive had been broken, and the swarm was now turning toward the one hand that dared reach in. News of the confiscated device spread quickly through internal channels. The state judicial office issued a directive for expanded security audits of the entire Richmond courthouse. Though Evelyn's name was never mentioned, everyone involved understood this was the system's first strike, a warning that someone was getting closer than they'd ever expected, and this time they didn't plan to stand by. But what they didn't know was Evelyn was no longer playing alone. Immediately after receiving the disconnection signal, Evelyn sent a short command sequence via her private encryption system. Within 10 minutes, 3 people received a Level 2 alert: a network engineer who once worked for the Department of Justice, an anonymous lawyer who had retired after refusing to lie as a witness, and a former enforcement officer framed for resisting fabricated evidence, people Evelyn had quietly helped untangle from the traps the system had set years ago. She called them the Silenced. When Evelyn began investigating Richmond, she didn't just collect evidence. She collected people, those who understood the system from the inside, who had once been crushed by it, and who were ready to stand if someone gave them a reason to step out of the shadows. She didn't promise justice. She didn't talk about change. She simply offered them a chance to stop being silent. In this particular case, it was a member of the security team, someone who'd been pushed out of frontline duty after discovering Dale had deleted surveillance logs, who swapped the real camera for a decoy at the last minute. The device that was seized contained doctored footage, tampered with, insufficient for legal proceeding. The real copy, extracted earlier by Evelyn, was now in the hands of 3 separate parties, one of whom had just sent a warning. Unauthorized access attempt failed. Someone is trying to crack the root key. She knew the counterattack had begun. But unlike before, this time every step she took was protected. Valerie, the network technician, had already blocked 3 unauthorized access attempts to Evelyn's previous servers. The law student, expelled from court last year, had uploaded the decoy clip to a hidden forum to create noise. And a lawyer who had nearly lost his license was now quietly preparing a class action suit in the name of citizens once denied a hearing by the system. None of them held official titles, none wore badges, but they all understood that if they didn't act now, they would remain names erased from records, just as they had been before. Evelyn sat in the dark room, reading every response, every authentication code, every system alert. Her heart did not race. She felt no fear. She only saw one thing clearly. They thought she was fighting the system alone. But the system is only strong when no one dares to reach out to each other. And she had reached. 3:12 a.m. The secure phone rang 3 times. Short, even, precise, like the kind of reminder sent by a machine with no emotion. It sat on a steel shelf beside the bed, running on a secure line with access known only to 3 people in Evelyn's network. She was already upright before her hand reached it, eyes fixed on the message displayed. No number, no signature, no spelling errors, no signs of amateur. If you send anything else, we'll find you before justice does. A warning without threats. No shouting, no cheap intimidation, the kind of message only sent by someone who knows they're close enough to be felt. Evelyn read it once. Then she removed the battery, placed the phone in a signal-bleaking tin box, and moved. No panic, no urgency. Every motion had been rehearsed 100 times over the past year. She pulled the curtains, checked the auxiliary camera hidden in the air vent. No movement. She plugged the main hard drive into an isolated encryption unit and triggered a 90-second full wipe of all local data. One by one, 4 screens blinked off. The information hadn't vanished. It had already been distributed elsewhere, but not a single copy remained here. She put on signal-resistant underlayers, tied her hair up, and placed 2 items into a crossbody tactical bag: a mobile encrypted drive containing the original unredacted evidence file and a paper folder with 3 short handwritten cipher sheets, enough to trace her sources manually if the digital routes were ever compromised. The 7th-floor apartment, once a live intel gathering node, was now just an empty room with 3 drill holes where the investigation board once hung. At 4:00 sharp, she stepped out. No one saw, no cameras, no tails. Evelyn wasn't the kind who fled. She was the kind who withdrew to begin the next phase. A nondescript rental car sat waiting in the basement garage, staged there 2 days ago for exactly this moment. She didn't drive to the previous safe house. She rerouted. The sender knew about the 7th floor. If they knew 1, they might know 2, but they didn't know everything. Evelyn had once written in her journal, a single line encoded in the white noise of an image file: "When they threaten your life, it's not because they're stronger, it's because fear is all they have left to stop justice." And she didn't carry fear with her. Her new base was underground, an abandoned telecom relay buried behind a defunct industrial park in the southern suburbs. The rusted steel door had a remote locking mechanism, controlled by one man in Evelyn's network. A former federal transmission engineer pushed out after refusing to alter GPS data in a police brutality case. Evelyn hadn't promised redemption, but she'd preserved the real records. He'd kept the site, waiting for the day someone would use it properly. At 5:27 a.m., Evelyn activated the secure router, connecting it one way to a decentralized encryption web. No traces, no reverse mapping. She inserted the drive into the core encoding terminal and began the upload. She didn't send it to one destination, she sent it to 3. The first, the National Civil Rights Alliance, Veterans in Exposing Systemic Corruption. Recipient, an attorney who had once sued the state for concealing abuse at a juvenile facility. Evelyn had followed his case, he never backed down. The second, the Center for Legal Equality and Justice, known for taking on lost cause cases rejected by federal courts. One of Evelyn's old colleagues, rejected by Hollowell 6 years ago, now worked there. He still kept the appeal that was never reviewed, and now it could ignite something legal. The third destination, an international watchdog group of human rights lawyers monitoring abuses in the U.S. Evelyn had contacted them before, under a code name. This time, she didn't use one. She sent everything: audio logs, transcripts, trial records, and the financial network linking Langston, Hollowell, and Dale. Each copy was independently encrypted with a 48-hour auto-decrypt unless she sent a kill signal. No safety nets, no choices left for herself, because this time the choice would belong to the public. 604-4. The screen flashed a single line: transmission complete. Confirmation code E17, VTA Aurora. She remained seated before the dark monitor. No pride, no triumph, just a quiet calm, like someone who had opened a floodgate others had tried to bury for 14 years. The person who sent that warning thought a message could stop her, that death was the limit. But Evelyn had never done this for herself. She did it for those never named, for the ones erased, for the records deleted and voices buried under court seals and closed hearings. She did it because no system changes until it's torn open by the very truths it tried to destroy. They believed fear could silence her, but Evelyn Bell didn't retreat. She only redirected, and this time, she wasn't moving alone. The file was sent at 8:00 a.m. No flashy subject line, no warning, just a folder named Case _6_unheard, attached to an email sent to 12 major and minor newsrooms, 3 independent investigative outlets, and 2 community radio stations. The sender, E. Bell. No title, only a short note: if you ever believed in justice, start with the cases the system refused to hear. Inside the folder was the complete data for 6 cases, 6 lives that fell into the gray zone of the law. 6 times the system shut its doors on the vulnerable. All had been personally overseen by Judge Hollowell, and all were dismissed under suspicious grounds, either due to technicalities or lack of sufficient cause. The first was Darnell Cruz, 16, charged with obstructing an officer for merely watching an arrest. No evidence, no witnesses. The report cited threatening demeanor, written by Dale. Second, Tiana Reed, 15, arrested for shoplifting at a pharmacy, even though camera footage showed her standing by the water aisle. The video file was unavailable by the time it reached court. The third case was the most gut-wrenching. A black man named Isaac Monroe filed a complaint after being beaten by police in a parking lot. Street cam footage existed, witnesses too, yet the case was dismissed for insufficient video resolution to confirm force. Evelyn extracted the original file from the city's server, clear, complete, and unedited. It had never been submitted to court. Case 4. Lucille Grant, a former administrative staffer who reported being ordered to delete transcripts. After filing the complaint, she was countersued for falsifying court documents. Evelyn included audio of an internal inquiry where Hollowell clearly said, "If you still want a career in this field, know when to stop." The fifth was a textbook false report. Dale himself wrote the file asserting Marcus Hill, a brown-skinned man arrested for running red lights and reckless driving, was a public threat. Evelyn had dashcam footage. Hill didn't run the light, didn't swerve. The stop happened because he matched someone in the system. And finally, the standout case. Carla Jennings, a single mother from East End, had filed 14 petitions to both local courts and the Inspector General. Her son Elijah was arrested during a rushed raid with no lawyer, no guardian present. He was convicted of possessing a weapon found under a shared couch. With no fingerprints, no confession, he served 3 years in juvenile detention, released with a record that ruined his chances at any scholarship. Evelyn didn't add commentary to the files, but each one contained new, unaltered evidence, testimonies, original reports, and, most critically, internal meeting recordings the public had never heard. In one, Hollowell's voice was unmistakable. "We can't reopen these. If we open one, we'll have to open 100. The state can't handle that." 6 voices, 6 cases, but just one disclosure. And Evelyn knew she had just pulled the first lever. The next morning, Richmond woke up to an unusual headline. The Herald ran a full-page front cover. "How the Well and the Rejection Machine, 5 years of buried cases." Below it, a blurred image of an internal memo, handwritten, "Do not release, sensitive." Other outlets quickly followed, national watchdogs like the Sentinel, Post-Chronicle, and once dismissed independent platforms. But this time, the proof was too clear, too structured, too undeniable. Within 3 hours of going live, Justice for Carla surged to #1 on social media. Users circulated an old photo of Carla Jennings holding her son at preschool graduation, once forgotten among millions of human rights records. Now a symbol for voices long suppressed. Under the hashtag, a wave of stories emerged. People whose cases were rejected, whose letters were ignored, who once thought they were alone. Someone wrote, "I thought I was the only one. Turns out we were all silenced the same way." Posts spread Evelyn's released audio, Hollowell defending systemic cover-ups as necessary for the stability of the state. Outrage didn't just come from activists, but from ordinary people who once believed the courtroom was their last hope. Less than 24 hours later, the State Attorney General's office was forced to issue a press release. "We take these revelations seriously and are considering forming an independent special commission to review cases connected to Judge Hollowell and the civil claims system from 2018 onward." The language was cautious, vague, but for the first time in over a decade, the words "judge investigation" appeared in a government statement. As the power structure began to tremble, Evelyn stayed silent. She didn't take the podium, no interviews, no rebuttals to praise or criticism. Her name appeared only once, in a tiny caption, "Data provided by source code E17. She let the victims speak instead." Carla Jennings appeared on local television, not crying, just retelling the story she had repeated behind closed doors. This time, someone listened. The law student once fired for questioning case records returned, holding a printed copy of the redacted transcript. Valerie, the technician who preserved the backup system, was interviewed by an independent outlet. recounting countless unexplained fix requests. Each of them, pieces of the network Evelyn had built from the shadows, was now stepping into the light. And they, not Evelyn, were the ones reigniting belief. No one called it a technical error anymore. The questions grew louder. How many more were hidden? How many names never made the paper? How many cries for help were thrown away? Evelyn watched everything from afar, never leaving her new safe house, never sending another message. But at day's end, she added one line to her encrypted journal. Justice doesn't begin in court. It begins the moment the first person stops staying silent. Among the thousands of residual files on the old Richmond Police Department server was a folder labeled Arch 2019 NP, short for Not Processed. Evelyn had seen this tag many times throughout her investigation. It usually housed corrupt clips, damaged recordings, or footage deemed unfit for official storage. But something about this one caught her attention. A system log noted that a James D4 model body cam had been connected on August 19, 2019, for less than 1 minute, then abruptly disconnected. The log stated, "Transfer failed. Manual interrupt." No one had noticed. No one had ever gone back, but Evelyn did. She extracted the full log partition, ran it through recovery software, and waited. After 4 hours of processing, a single file surfaced. Default name, vid_1479_B4X. Size, 96 MB. Length, 42 seconds. The video began with hurried footsteps. James Dale appeared in the frame from the left, standing in front of a teenager, black, about 15, wearing a green hoodie, arms hanging at his sides, eyes cautious. There was no shouting, no aggression, just a quiet stare. Dale stopped, glared at the boy, and said clearly, "What you looking at?" The boy didn't answer. He just held that gaze, not defiant, not mocking, just the kind of look someone wears after being dismissed one too many times. Dale smirked, then suddenly raised his right hand and slapped the boy hard across the face. The slap echoed through the still air. Immediately afterward, Dale turned to the camera and said, "Turn it off." The video cut. No glitch, no fade, just a manual shutdown. Evelyn didn't need a second viewing. She paused at frame 1479, the moment Dale's hand was still in the air, about to strike. The boy's face was frozen in clarity, eyes wide, lips pressed tight, bracing against pain he refused to vocalize. That look wasn't fake. It wasn't dramatized. It couldn't be denied. The 2019 case report claimed camera malfunctioned, footage lost during upload, incident unveiled. Dale was cleared. The boy, Tyshawn Carter, was written up as displaying aggressive behavior. His family had no lawyer. The matter was closed in under a week. But now, with just 42 seconds and one unfiltered frame, the truth was no longer buried. Evelyn extracted the clip, encrypted it with triple-layer security, and labeled it Original Body Cam Footage, Tyshawn Carter Case, Frame 1479. She then composed 3 emails. No name, no message, just the attachment. She sent them to 3 news outlets known for publicly challenging police silence. In her journal, she wrote, "A slap is not a minor detail. It's the beginning of a system's collapse. And this time, the frame won't disappear." The video went live without announcement, without explanation, and without a source. 42 seconds of body cam footage released simultaneously by 3 major media platforms. Each post carried the same caption, Frame 1479, Original Body Cam Footage from the Tyshawn Carter Case, technically verified. Within 6 hours, it was everywhere. On social media, it exploded. The hashtag Frame1479 topped the charts on X within 3 hours, surpassing political debates, global events, and corporate marketing campaigns. The public's reaction was immediate and visceral, not only because of the slap, but because of what came after. Turn it off. It wasn't ambiguous. It wasn't open to interpretation. It destroyed the official line from 2019. Camera malfunctioned, unrecoverable. Evelyn hadn't just revealed a video. She released the technical log detailing the camera's connection, the exact second it was cut, and how the footage was moved to a hidden folder with restricted access. The footage hadn't been lost. It had been hidden, deliberately. The log was a confession in code, and now the system had nowhere to hide. The first public voice came from Tyshawn Carter's mother. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She simply held up the rejection letter for their appeal, stamped in red, insufficient basis for further investigation. She placed it on the table and said, "My son was hit. Then he was blamed. Then he was forced into silence." But the camera didn't stay silent. It just waited for someone to turn it back on. Beneath the video, the comments kept pouring in. One read, "I was arrested once for looking the wrong way. I still remember that stare." Another, "No one believed me until there was a frame. Thank you, frame 1479. And it's not hearsay anymore. It's light. It's true. The wave was no longer emotional. It was evidentiary. In less than 24 hours, the Executive Review Board convened an emergency meeting. Media outlets ran legal analyses on whether charges against James Dale could be reopened, not as civil misconduct, but as criminal assault. The Sheriff's Department refused to comment. But the pressure was real, this time, from both the public and those once silenced by insufficient evidence. Evelyn didn't step into the light. She didn't post or respond. She never confirmed she was the one who restored the file. But each of the three outlets received an identical tech log from a masked source address, code that only someone with access to the internal police systems could generate. It wasn't about getting credit, it was about making sure no one could pretend it hadn't happened. She knew the footage couldn't restore justice to Tyshawn, not completely, but it made ignorance impossible, and that for Evelyn was a kind of justice in itself. In her final encrypted dispatch before shutting down her transmission rig that night, she wrote, "A slap doesn't just sting a child, it hits the system itself, and this time, no one gets to turn off the camera." Room 7B, in the basement level of the Virginia Supreme Court, had no nameplate. A thick wooden door, gray walls, and no windows. It was the space reserved for internal meetings. Cases the system didn't want public. No cameras, no official records circulated. Evelyn was summoned for a 9:00 IMing hearing under the pretense of reviewing conduct damaging to the image of the judiciary, an unofficial charge, but one that carried the full weight of warning. 5 people sat behind a long table. 4 were members of the Judicial Ethics Committee. Dark suits, cold eyes. The 5th, a representative from the Department of Justice, was there merely as an observer. No handshakes, no greetings. Evelyn was shown to a low, backless chair, a deliberate detail designed to shrink the one seated in it. The presiding officer began. "The purpose of this hearing is to determine whether Ms. Evelyn Bell, internal investigator, engaged in unauthorized disclosure of classified information, breached confidentiality, and severely harmed the integrity of the state judicial system." Evelyn didn't flinch. She didn't blink, didn't bow her head, didn't offer a defense. She simply placed a black-bound file on the table, sealed in silver-white tape. It read, "Confidential, E17, subject, Richmond Judicial Review Log, attachment, 27 cases, irregular processing patterns." The room paused. One committee member frowned, leaned forward. The man at the center spoke, cautious. "What exactly have you brought?" Evelyn answered, "I'm not here to defend myself. I'm here to understand why I'm being judged through the very system you claim to protect." She continued, "This file details 27 dismissed cases from the last 6 years, all directly linked to Judge Hollowell. Each one shows evidence of file manipulation, altered case codes, or transcript edits ordered post-trial." Silence. Then, 9 were erased from federal records. 5 share content but were filed under different case numbers. 3 had key witnesses relocated right after appeals, and 1 involved the daughter of someone on this committee. She didn't name names. She didn't have to. The man farthest to the right, Judge Bernard Rusk, a public supporter of Hollowell, froze. His hand tapped the wood, fingertip trembling. Evelyn didn't raise her voice nor her gaze. "You summoned me for review. But if you truly want to hold someone accountable for harming this system's image, that file on the table is enough to start another hearing. for the right person. A pen clicked. One man lowered his head. Another stepped out, citing an urgent call. No one asked Evelyn another question for the rest of the session. That file wasn't just evidence, it was a mirror, and everyone present who had come to condemn found themselves reflected in it. The case list contained IDs, defendant names, filing dates, reasons for dismissal, and one red-labeled column: tampering indicators. It logged mismatched case IDs, removed files, no transcript orders, and backdated rulings. These weren't just screenshots. Each case came with before and after records from internal databases. Timestamps showed edits at 3:17 a.m. Sunday mornings, outside protocol. Admin accounts traced back to Hollowell's office. Some cases included photos of handwritten notes from court staff, notes buried, writers reassigned or placed on indefinite leave. One note read faintly in pencil: "Do not change the date. If it says 2020, the defendant can counter. Hollowell said leave 2018. Page after page, Evelyn flipped calmly, offering no commentary. The data spoke, quietly, unshakably. Then came Case 19. Judge Bernard Rusk, vocal critic of whistleblowers, clenched his fists. Evelyn didn't look up, but she knew. Page 76 bore the heading, "Savannah Rusk, Richmond Police Department dismissed due to lack of legal grounds. Dismissing Judge Hollowell. Transcript altered, confirmed. Clerk reassigned, confirmed. Tampering log present." Savannah Rusk, his daughter, a young woman, was harassed by officers while working a late shift. Her complaint had been dismissed within 9 days. No hearing, no explanation. Rusk once told the press, "My daughter understands the system doesn't always go your way." But his eyes had betrayed disbelief, and now he was reading the real reason. No one spoke. No one needed to. When Evelyn closed the file, no one dared touch it. The presiding officer, who had opened with a stiff warning, now only said, "This document will be retained for further review. The hearing is adjourned." Not concluded, adjourned. But everyone knew something had changed. No one rose before Evelyn. She stood first, walked out without looking back. The door to room 7B closed gently behind her, and inside no one dared reach for the file labeled Confidential-E17 again. They summoned her to stand trial, but by the end not one of them could bring themselves to look at the evidence lying open before them. The Eastern District Federal Court had never witnessed a hearing like the one that morning. By 6 a.m., hundreds had lined up at the gates. Journalists crammed every hallway, spilling into the parking lot. Legal observers from human rights organizations filled every available seat. For the first time in 17 years, a federal hearing on systemic case rejections and judicial manipulation was being held publicly. And the one leading the hearing wasn't a lawyer, wasn't a judge, but someone who had once operated in the shadows. Evelyn Bell. She no longer wore glasses. No more dark-colored clothes. No longer the invisible E17 mentioned in internal memos. She wore a white blouse, a navy blazer, no badge at her collar, and carried a single file, not to present, but to do the one thing she had always believed in: walk the truth through the front door. Beside her stood those who had once been forced into silence by the system. First was Carla Jennings, in a black dress, holding a photo of her son, Elijah, a boy wrongfully convicted and imprisoned for 3 years. Her face was calm, her eyes dry. Tears had long run out after 14 unanswered petitions. Next was Tyshawn Carter, now 19. Taller than before, but still carrying the guarded gaze of someone once slapped for looking the wrong way. His mother stood beside him, the woman who once begged to see a video the police claimed was damaged. Valerie, the systems technician, entered with the original data she had once illegally backed up to protect justice. No one had seen her face before, but she was the one who had preserved the digital traces the system thought it had erased forever. The last was Roger Linwood, a former court staffer, reassigned from his records post for non-compliance in internal review procedures. He carried a printed memo, his transfer request, bearing a handwritten note from the chief judge: "Remove before he speaks again." They said nothing as they entered. They didn't chant slogans. Their presence was enough. The courtroom was packed. Not a single seat remained. Dozens stood against the walls. Some sat cross-legged on the floor. Reporters kept flashing photos, but no one spoke. The atmosphere was not one of anticipation. It was a sacred silence, as if everyone in the room understood that something important was about to be said, and it must not be interrupted. Evelyn was the first to take the stand. She didn't look at the hearing board right away. She scanned the room, nodding gently to each person beside her before speaking. "I didn't bring theories or arguments here today. I brought people whose names were erased from the justice system." Then she pointed, one by one, without elaboration. A mother whose petition was rejected 14 times. A teenager recorded as aggressive by eye contact. A technician threatened for backing up data that shouldn't exist. A court employee reassigned for refusing to delete a line of code. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to hear them, finally, when they have the right to speak. No one moved. No reporters typed. No one checked their phone. Everyone understood. This was no longer a story. It was truth made visible. With faces, with records, and there was no excuse left to turn away. Midway through the hearing, just as Evelyn stepped down from the stand, a representative from the Federal Internal Oversight Agency entered the courtroom. He wore a gray suit and a credential with a special seal. No introduction needed. In his hand was a sealed document folder, barely half an inch thick, but heavy enough to shift the room's energy as he approached the executive council table. The hearing coordinator looked up. The agent gave a slight nod, then turned to the board. "The interim conclusion from oversight has been finalized. We find substantial grounds of ethical misconduct concerning Case 1479, specifically intentional suppression of video evidence in the prosecution of juvenile Tyshawn Carter." Then he turned to James Dale, sitting less than 10 meters away. "Officer James Dale, under the authority of the Public Conduct Oversight Act, I hereby notify you of your immediate suspension from duty pending criminal investigation." James jumped to his feet. He opened his mouth to speak, but the room stood before he could, not with shouting, but with absolute silence. Camera flashes went off. Every lens turned to him. No one needed orders. This was the moment they had waited for. No one escorted James out, no handcuffs, but that made it worse. He didn't protest. He simply looked around, as if, for the first time, realizing that every gaze had shifted. And among those eyes he found Evelyn's. She didn't look at him with hatred, just with a cold detachment, as if to say, "I don't need to speak. The truth already did." Then came a movement even more seismic. Judge Hollowell stood, not to defend, not to justify, not to explain. He said nothing. He picked up his leather briefcase and walked toward the side exit, the one reserved for senior judiciary members. No one stopped him. No one saluted. No one dared call his name. That silent retreat rang louder than any indictment. It was not an excuse. It was a silent admission that everyone in the room heard clearly. The hearing moderator broke from script for the first time. He didn't return to the witness list. He looked directly at the board and asked, "How many convictions must be reviewed if everything Ms. Bell said is true?" No one answered immediately, but everyone knew the door had been opened and it could never be closed again. The hearing was adjourned in solemn silence. No applause, no cheers. Just Evelyn, standing still, looking out over the public gallery where Carla, Tyshawn, Valerie, Roger, and dozens of others sat. They were no longer called victims. They were witnesses, and they had been heard. No one shouted, no one cried, but on that day in that room, no one dared lift their head before the very system they had once obeyed. The program aired at 8:00 p.m. on the national channel, in the segment Voices of Justice, a rare platform that never shied away from difficult questions. The host, Eliza Monroe, was known for confronting cabinet ministers live on air, but tonight she didn't challenge anyone. She broadcast a recording. "For your attention," Eliza said, "an unreleased excerpt from a conversation between myself and Evelyn Bell, recorded 2 days before the hearing." She pressed play. On screen, the hearing room, motionless faces, eyes that wouldn't rise, and Evelyn's voice steady, untouched by editing. I don't believe I'll change the system. I just believe that if even one hand stays clean, it must not let go in a room full of dirty ones. The studio fell into silence. Eliza said nothing more. The clip lasted less than 90 seconds, but at a moment when an entire country was asking, what happens next, it became the answer. Not through debate, but through moral clarity. Within 3 minutes, thousands of shares exploded online. Evelyn's words were clipped, paired with piano music and hearing room images, and the video became the most viewed in 24 hours. One user wrote, "It's the first time I cried over a single line on television." Another said, "She didn't deliver a speech. She said what we've always needed to hear, but no one dared to." That night, a Reddit forum called The System and the Truth was born. Its first post titled, "One Clean Hand, a room full of dirt, and what happens if we don't let go?" The media erupted. Morning broadcasts opened with Evelyn's quote. Networks replayed the clip. Public figures and scholars voiced support. A historian remarked, "That wasn't a call to action, it was a reminder. Justice starts with the last person unwilling to look away." But it was the public's response that mattered more. On the walls of Richmond Law School, someone chalked the phrase, "If one hand stays clean." In a Southern high school, students recreated the hearing as a wordless play, using only lights and the audio clip. The hashtag #OneCleanHand became a new symbol. It didn't bear Evelyn's name, but everyone knew it was hers. Evelyn didn't reappear. No interviews, no commentary, yet in one night, her voice, once dismissed as disruptive, became something the country paused to hear. She didn't shout. She didn't preach. She simply spoke, as if sitting in that same room, looking each person in the eye and asking, "Is anyone else left?" Within 12 hours of the broadcast, national newspapers changed their tone. Gone were sensational headlines. Instead, one clean hand, one sentence that shook a nation. But more powerful than the media was the people, those who had long stayed silent. Evelyn's name surged across forums, protest signs, student essays, and posters across Richmond, Atlanta, and Chicago. But she wasn't just mentioned, she was invoked. At a Delaware high school, an LED board read, "We teach law like Evelyn Bell lived it." Online, the hashtag Evelyn Bell no longer led to updates, it became a confessional. Victims of ignored cases, silenced law students, and whistleblowers each wrote their stories, ending with the same line, "I didn't dare speak until she spoke for me." A major network, long silent on judicial abuse, aired a special titled "The Bell Tolls, a Reckoning for Justice." Evelyn declined to appear but sent a short recording. "If anyone thinks I'm a hero, they've never seen what I've seen. I'm just someone who stopped bowing my head." What surprised most was the youth. Law schools launched forums titled E17 and the Ethics of Systems. Students wore white armbands, the symbol of the clean hand, into exam halls. In New York, street artists painted Evelyn's portrait across a brick wall, eyes forward, with the words, "Speak, even if the system tells you not to." Even the silent began to speak. A retired judge admitted, "I once saw Evelyn as a threat to the institution. Now I know silence was the true threat." An anonymous officer wrote, "I still have a clean hand. I've filed a request to transfer departments." Evelyn never claimed credit. She didn't grant interviews. She simply disappeared, and that silence only made her words ring louder. No one called it a stunt. No one doubted her motives. She didn't want to be remembered, but everyone remembered her. When the state convened an emergency session to announce a full judicial review, a reporter asked the governor, "Is this because of public pressure?" He answered, "Maybe, but more than that, because of pressure from the truth." That evening, the national news opened with this. She didn't speak to be remembered, but when an entire system chooses silence, one voice is enough to make everyone listen. And in that moment, everyone understood. Evelyn Bell was no longer just a name. She was living proof of a simple idea. Being alone does not mean being powerless. As long as you still have a clean hand and speak at the right time. When Marcus Langston, Attorney General of Virginia, stepped up to the press podium that morning, he was still a man of power. Charcoal gray suit, navy tie, composed expression, as if all the uproar outside was nothing more than temporary noise. The press had already filled the Department of Justice hall early. This was Langston's first public statement since the historic hearing that shook the system, and he knew the entire state was watching. Standing before 11 microphones, he opened with a calm voice. "I am here not because I was forced to be. I am here because I believe the truth must be told from the source, untainted by edits or by those who claim to stand above the law." From his very first sentence, Langston set the tone, an appeal to legality and an indirect jab at Evelyn Bell. He didn't name her, but everyone knew who he meant. Recently, certain individuals, though never formally appointed, have chosen to abuse investigative roles to manipulate media, build a false hero narrative, and smear the justice system they once swore to serve. Langston denied any connection to Judge Hollowell or Officer James Dale. He stated he had never interfered in any civil rights case dismissals, and that all decisions were made under clearly defined executive procedures. When asked by reporters about leaked emails and recordings related to campaign funding, Langston countered, "No official emails have been verified. No evidence indicates direct wrongdoing. What you're calling proof could just be excerpts taken out of context." He didn't raise his voice. He wasn't angry. He remained measured, and that was precisely what made some people waver. By that afternoon, several outlets ran headlines like "Langston, calm amid the justice storm," and "When the lawkeeper faces a moral crossroad." On social media, the atmosphere split in two. Some who had supported Evelyn began to question, "She's an agent, why leak classified info to the press?" Criticism appeared. Did Evelyn Bell overstep her mandate? She exposed confidential data. Is that any different from sabotaging the system? Langston saw what he needed. The public opinion was dividing. And in politics, division is sometimes all it takes to stall momentum. He ended the press conference with a statement dripping in implication. Sometimes, the greatest threat to justice doesn't come from outside the system, but from those who believe they are better than it. Camera shutters exploded, news channels looped his final sentence on repeat. On the radio, pundits debated heatedly. Langston offered no proof of his innocence, but he had planted something far more dangerous, doubt. And in politics, if the truth is delayed long enough, it can be replaced. He stepped off the podium with a satisfied expression. The car door shut behind him. The system still stood, at least for the next 48 hours. Langston believed he had regained control. What he didn't know was that at the exact moment he spoke those final words, an email was sent from an encrypted address, verified evidence, Horizon PAC. Attached, account codes, transaction logs, and a note, $1,200,000, 0 cents. Did not bypass legal process. Evelyn wasn't in that press room, but her reply was already en route. Exactly 48 hours after Marcus Langston closed his speech with, "The greatest threat to justice is sometimes the one who thinks they're above the law," a file appeared simultaneously across independent investigative media platforms. FileDAC, HST PAC Finance 1220 GSET. Sender, anonymous, but one look inside, and it was clear Evelyn Bell had responded, not with a microphone but with data. The file contained a sequence of encrypted financial documents, accompanied by a note. Documents extracted from the internal server of Horizon Stability PAC, the legal funding entity behind the 2020 post-protest stabilization campaign. Inside was a $1,200,000 0-cent transaction record, routed through 3 sub-funds. But the final destination, per the transfer commands, was the Office of Special Policy, Office of the Attorney General of Virginia. Approver, M. Langston, but it wasn't the amount that shocked the state. It was the contents. of a related internal email. Excerpt: Grant B 9421 will be prioritized for law enforcement and legal bodies to ensure stability amid increasing civil unrest threats in Richmond, Atlanta, and Tallahassee. Priority 1, maintain expedited legal response, no appeals, to prevent precedent for judicial resistance. Signed, Douglas Creel, PAC, CFO, cc.clang@justice.gov.va. Digital signature verified. Transaction codes matched federal logs. Undeniable. The media exploded overnight. Major outlets interrupted regular programming. Some previously pro-Langston publications revised headlines. 1.2 million reasons to rethink his every word. On social media, the hashtag Langston1.2M surged to the top. A meme went viral. Langston at the mic during the press conference, with a caption edited below, "I never received anything except $1,200,000, 0 cents. By midnight, the state government office issued a public statement. We acknowledge the published documents and are requesting independent audit verification regarding all Horizon PAC transactions. But to the public, it was no longer about audits. It was about ethics. And Evelyn had nothing left to say. She didn't hold a press conference. She didn't post online. She didn't give interviews. She left only one sentence at the top of the encrypted archive. Langston thought media could blur the truth, but I don't need airtime. I only need one line: verified. Legal experts described the archive as indirect evidence so strong it no longer required dialogue. Civil rights organizations called for Langston's temporary suspension. Several state legislators launched administrative impeachment petitions. A member of the Budget Oversight Committee stated publicly, if that money had no political purpose, why did it route through 3 shell funds? And why did it coincide exactly with the civil case dismissal surge? Evelyn gave no reply, because for her, a system doesn't need to be shouted at. It only needs to be shown the right amount of light and let the truth do the rest. No one called it a hearing. No one dared call it an internal meeting. On the official notice released at 7:30 IMM, it read only, "Special vote of the State Bar Commission on disciplinary proposals regarding Judge Hollowell and Attorney General Marcus Langston." But everyone understood this was a historic moment, and the first time justice was weighed where the whole country could see it. 24 hours prior, an independent audit confirmed the full validity of the data provided by Evelyn Bell. From Horizon PAC files, internal emails, to clear evidence of procedural manipulation in dismissed claims, legal organizations, human rights groups, and the press demanded an emergency, unedited, and public session. Under overwhelming pressure, the State Bar Commission agreed and allowed the entire meeting to be live-streamed. Start time, 10:00 IEM. Location, 4th floor Assembly Hall, State Justice Headquarters, Richmond. 15 microphones lay on the table, open the entire time. No music, no host. Each person sat in a pre-assigned seat. No name tags, no partitions. From home screens, cafes, and even law school lecture halls, more than 2.1 million people tuned in live. Every movement carried meaning. Attendees included 5 veteran attorneys elected by region, 3 appellate court reps, 2 law scholars from major universities, 3 civil rights inspectors, and 2 honorary former chief judges. No side conversations, no polite laughter. Even the session clerk typed only when a motion was formally submitted, no filler notes, no background chatter. At the center of the table, amidst files and procedure manuals, lay a black leather folder. A small white label on the front read, File Code E17X, verified by federal audit. Inside, full evidence of 27 manipulated cases, illicit campaign funding, and irregular directives from Langston. Evelyn Bell wasn't in the room, but everyone knew she was the reason they were. The session began with an announcement. No debate, no open floor. Each member received 2 ballots, one for the proposal to impeach Judge Hollowell and one for the motion to suspend Attorney General Langston, pending an extended investigation. The vote was scheduled for exactly 11:59 a.m., not a second late. For the next 90 minutes, no one spoke, only pages turning, a projector enlarging the phrase, Transfer B 9421, $1,200,000, 0 cents, or the names of citizens whose cases were quietly dismissed. The live stream camera never shifted angles. Every face remained in frame, as if each were a part of a larger reckoning. No one made eye contact. They stared forward or into the camera as though confronting not just public scrutiny, but their own conscience. At 11:45, the digital clock turned red. A message below it read, 14 minutes until vote. The tension didn't come from words, but from the prolonged silence. Something far more dangerous in politics than any accusation. And at the center of the room, without subpoenas or cross-examinations, the E-17X file sat, silent, yet seemingly staring back at everyone. 11:58. The lighting in the room didn't change, but the air grew thick, as if everyone held their breath for the drop. On the screen above the chairperson's table, the words, 1:00 minutes remaining, glowed orange. No one could speak. No one could retract their ballot. This was the moment of definition, for each person in the room and for the system trembling outside it. The final two members who hadn't voted, Honorary Judge Harold Venn and State Attorney Margaret Knoll, sat at opposite ends of the table, but their eyes met across the middle. Both had once supported Langston, opposed Evelyn's investigation, and called it a threat to public confidence in the justice system. But no one was invoking stability anymore. Venn exhaled. No one heard it, but the camera captured his face, the look of a man about to put down something he had carried too long. At 11:59 and 13 seconds, he cast his ballot. It read, "Yes, impeach Hollowell." No applause, no reaction. But everyone knew the scales had tipped. At 11:59 and 28 seconds, Knoll dropped the final vote, yes, to suspend Langston. Those two yeses needed no microphone, but millions watching the live stream understood. The system had chosen not to remain silent. The results were read aloud in a flat, measured voice by the commission's clerk. Total votes for the impeachment of Judge Hollowell, 12/15. Approved. Total votes for the suspension of Attorney General Langston, 11/15. Approved. Some reporters outside the hall cried, not from emotion, but from the realization that they could finally write a sentence generations of journalists had feared to print. The state judiciary formally launches high-level internal investigation on its own motion. The twist didn't lie in the outcome, but in one ballot found during post-section review. On the back, in faded blue ink, someone had handwritten, "I once believed preserving the system's image mattered more than reopening justice. Today, I no longer believe that." No one claimed it. Online, the moment the final two ballots dropped was clipped and reposted with one line overlaid. 11:59, no turning back. Evelyn never appeared. But from a small cafe down south, someone snapped a photo of her watching the result on her phone. No smile, no exhaustion, just calm, as if she'd known the result all along. As if she didn't need anyone to remember her name, as long as the names the system once tried to erase were remembered. When the clock struck 11:59, an untouchable system stood cornered, and for the first time, justice didn't step back in the face of power. Room 417 sat at the end of the hallway on the 6th floor of the Richmond Federal Administrative Building. No nameplate, no guard. A gray steel door with a single frosted window. Just enough light glowing from inside to prove it hadn't gone dark. This was the kind of room reserved for decisions the system didn't want to announce, but had to make to keep from breaking apart at the seam. That morning, Evelyn Bell entered alone. No panel, no reporters, no one to open the door for her. She had only been left a temporary access card with a note, "One-time clearance." Valid for 60 minutes. Inside, the room felt like a slice of frozen time. Absolute silence. A long mahogany table, no podium, no computer. Only 3 documents placed neatly side by side, each clipped, each marked with a federal prosecution code. TR/1479, J Street. Dale, TP/812, M. Hollowell, KQ/1217, M. Langston. On each front page, one bold line, Federal Criminal Indictment, under Clause 5.9, for abuse of power and judicial system manipulation. Evelyn didn't sit right away. She stood and looked at them for a long time. Then, from the pocket of her coat, she drew out a small item wrapped in a worn ivory silk handkerchief. She unfolded it to reveal an old Parker fountain pen, silver cap scratched, forest green body dulled by age, ink residue settled in the grooves. It had belonged to her father, used when he wrote his appeal in 2004. The appeal was rejected without a hearing because of false testimony from an officer named Dale and a rushed verdict from a judge named Hollowell. He died in prison afterward, under a charge of disturbing the peace. The pen had been returned, along with a note, submission not eligible for review. She placed it next to the first indictment. She didn't clean the pen, didn't test the ink. Her hand was steady. First signature, Evelyn M. Bell, beneath the indictment for James Dale. No one witnessed it. No one asked her to do it, but this was the final step in a journey that no longer required validation. The second file, Hollowell, was the thickest. It came with 27 appendices, including improperly dismissed cases and statements from court employees reassigned after whistleblowing. She signed in the designated space, without hesitation, without correction. The third document, Langston, was the only one printed on special ivory-toned paper. Below the line stating, unreported campaign contributions and use of funds to influence legal outcome, was a blank space for interagency indictment approval. Evelyn inhaled once, deeply, then wrote slowly, E. M. Bell, authorized special inspector, jurisdiction code E17. She didn't stand immediately after. She just looked at the pen. Today, that pen won't be returned, she whispered, not to anyone else, just to the memory that had once been left behind. She laid the pen down, wrapped it in the old silk, and walked out of the room. No glance back, no dramatic door slam, just 3 pieces of paper, now inked, and a room that, after that day, would never again be nameless. Every stroke Evelyn laid down wasn't just a bureaucratic formality. It was an engraving, etching a history that had never been formally acknowledged. No cameras, no transcripts. But those bold strokes of green ink, unshaken, uncorrected, captured a moment that generations, once silenced by the system, could look at and know. Someone chose not to turn away. The 3 indictments were signed in silence, but it was the 4th document, the one sealed in a small brown folder, that made Evelyn pause the longest. Its title read, Special Review Petition. Petition, civil claims dismissed without public hearing. This was not a file meant to punish, it was one meant to restore. A list of 11 cases pushed out of the system, under the pretext of insufficient merit, most of them involving abuse of authority, racial discrimination, or administrative misconduct. Among them, Case DC-24, Carla Jennings' lawsuit over her son's 3-year detention for threatening demeanor in a public space. Also, DC-45, the case of an Asian American student denied legal protection after being evicted from campus housing for causing psychological discomfort. Evelyn read every summary line. At the bottom of the document was a handwritten note by her. Request for case reopening under expanded procedural oversight. Each case is to be reviewed with at least 3 civil rights observers present. Full documentation to be recorded and archived publicly. She signed the final page, not with standard black ink, but with her father's pen. The line was slightly angled, but bold and clear. No one watched. No one needed to, because in that moment she was no longer signing as an investigator. She was signing as the heir to a generation that wrote appeals no one ever read. And today, their words were being rewritten in their daughter's hand. Outside, The midday sun touched the frosted window of room 417. It wasn't bright, it wasn't harsh, just a soft yellow beam, like the glow of old desk lamps in the homes where handwritten appeals were once quietly drafted. Some had called that light useless, but to Evelyn it was the only kind warm enough to remind her memory still lives here. There are verdicts handed down in courtrooms, there are verdicts written in the dark. But there are verdicts, like today's, signed in memory, and in the yellow light our elders were once left behind. 4 weeks after the signing inside room 4017, the Eastern District Federal Courthouse began to welcome back those the system once forced into silence, not to apologize, not to offer sympathy, but to listen, publicly, transparently, under light with cameras, transcripts, and signatures. 11 cases were reopened, each one previously dismissed under the pretense of insufficient legal grounds or procedural deficiencies. Now, every case had its own room, an independent review panel, and 3 civil rights observers assigned to record the proceedings. No more internal handling. No more silent dismissals. Carla Jennings was the first to speak at the review hearing for case DC-24, Elijah Jennings, sentenced to 3 years in juvenile detention for resisting an officer. The nation once knew her through desperate pleas and a black and white photo pinned over her heart, but that day she stood calmly before the court and said, "I'm not here to reclaim those 3 years. I'm here to reclaim my son's dignity, because no one has the right to write a child's life with a false signature." For the first time in 6 years, her words were entered into the official record. Uncut, uninterrupted, no longer a parental comment, but recognized as evidence. In another room, a case once deleted from the system was unexpectedly restored, DC-19, involving unlawful detainment in the Southbridge neighborhood. The original file was recovered by Valerie, a former technician who secretly backed up the system's data before being forced to resign 3 years ago. The copy was encrypted, stored on a private hard drive. When Valerie appeared before the panel, she wore no uniform, no ID badge, just held a small USB and quietly said, "I wasn't strong enough then to fight the system, but I was clear-headed enough to keep what they thought was gone." Then came a side twist in case DC-11, previously dismissed in 2021 for lack of administrative accountability criteria. The plaintiff's legal representative was a young woman in a light gray suit, hair tied back, no credentials needed. Yet the panel recognized her, Amara Leong, a former intern expelled from the prosecutor's office for refusing to delete internal records. 3 years ago, she was labeled unprofessional for defying orders. Now she presented her filing, read the appeal clauses, and concluded, "I didn't return for revenge. I returned to prove that preserving a file isn't disloyalty. It's loyalty to what's right." There was no media frenzy, no direct interviews, but millions watched via live stream, and hundreds, once been dismissed, began searching for their old case numbers. No one claimed that justice had fully returned, but in each room, each hearing, each soft click of a recording device, something had shifted. Those once called baseless were now addressed by name. Stories once silenced were now rewritten, line by line, word by word. And in the quietest courtroom, room 3, East Wing, someone taped a small note beside the nameplate. "This is where the locked files once sat, and now it's where the survivors return." His name was Malik Jones. He had been arrested at age 12 for threatening a law enforcement officer, but the only threat listed was that he raised his hand to shield his mother from Officer Dale's gun during a mistaken raid. No weapon, no aggression, just a boy in a red shirt, barefoot, trembling, standing in front of his mother. That trial lasted 14 minutes. No personal attorney, no rebuttal. Malik was sent to juvenile detention for 18 months, with no appeal. He lost 2 years of school, his mother lost her job, they moved, and since then, Malik had never spoken about the case. No statements, no interviews, not a word on social media. He grew up in silence. Among all the files Evelyn ever reviewed, Malik was the only one who never replied to the rehearing invitation, but his mother showed up. The rehearing was held in a small courtroom with only 20 seats. Press access was restricted to protect his privacy. Yet thousands watched the live stream, breathless, as the name appeared on the courtroom display: DC-3 Malik Priz, Richmond Police Department. The reassigned judge was a young man with experience in juvenile advocacy. When the hearing began, he didn't request evidence. He simply read the case summary for the first time in a neutral voice without bias, and he concluded with a phrase never before used for Malik: plaintiff, citizen, Malik Jones. Malik looked up. No one could read his expression. Rage or exhaustion built over time. He didn't speak. He didn't nod. He just stared. A civil rights attorney stepped forward, presented the appeal petition, cited procedural violations, pointed out the lack of legal representation and the absence of proper defense protocol, and ended with, Malik Jones was never given a chance to speak in court. We're not asking him to speak today, but at the very least, the system must acknowledge, even for 1 minute, his existence. Nothing was ruled on immediately, but the hearing ended with an act not written into any transcript. Malik stood, walked to the center of the room, looked around, no wave, no bow. But just before exiting, he stopped, turned toward the panel, and smiled. A small smile, not one of forgiveness, nor seeking sympathy, just the smile of someone who had finally been called by his rightful name. That night, a photo circulated online. Malik stepping out of the courthouse, golden dusk casting his shadow across the stone steps behind him. No hashtags, no captions, but beneath it someone wrote a single line: "We cannot return time, but we can call them by their true names and let them walk forward as if they had never been forgotten." When the state of Virginia held a ceremony to honor individuals who had made significant contributions to judicial reform, the first name announced was Evelyn Bell. Invitations were sent to FBI headquarters, to the mailbox of the Inspector General's office, and to a residential address believed to be her temporary home. None received a reply. The organizers later received a craft envelope. No logo, no return address. Inside was a single printed sheet. "I didn't do it to be honored. I did it so no one else would have to live in silence the way my father did. I don't need forgiveness. I just need the truth to continue." Evelyn Bell. Not long after, a small center quietly opened in the south of Richmond. No ribbon cutting, no speeches. The sign above the door read, "The Second Voice, Community Legal Support Center." It was unaffiliated with any government agency. No state funding. It was built by a group of people who had once been silent. Evelyn did not serve as director. Her name appeared nowhere on any license. She had only a small desk near the front door. Each day she sat there, reading files, meeting with residents, and handwriting notes for young law students interning at the center. No one needed permission to come, no income check, no valid reason, just a story that hadn't been heard and the determination not to let it disappear. A single mother came in with a petition once rejected for incorrect format. A man was arrested for walking the wrong way in an upscale neighborhood. A student was suspended for making others feel threatened by a look. Every story was different. Each one a fragment of memory the system had tried to erase. Evelyn didn't ask much. She simply listened. And when needed, she didn't speak like an investigator, but like someone who knew what it meant to be called the wrong name. In her office hung one photo. Not a diploma, not a medal. It showed her father in a faded shirt, writing his first appeal. The image was blurred at the edges, but a yellow desk lamp cast light directly on the tip of his pen. Beneath it, a handwritten card read, "Clean hands don't need forgiveness, they just need to continue." Soon, law students from 3 major universities came to volunteer. They weren't paid. They came to learn what it meant to practice law where justice doesn't come automatically. One of them asked Evelyn during a break, "Do you think people who did wrong, like Dale or Hollowell, can be forgiven?" Evelyn replied without looking up from her file, "I don't have the right to forgive. And I don't need them to ask. They don't owe me. They owe the people they forced into silence. As for me, I owe my father one thing, to make sure no one else has to stay quiet like he did. Word of the center spread, quietly but steadily. No one called it post-justice. No one called Evelyn a hero. They called her the one who didn't back down. Not for glory, not for reputation, but because she went to the end of the truth. And once there, she didn't stop. A journalist once asked her in a rare interview, "If this system truly changed, would you return to it?" She answered without hesitation, "No, because I no longer need it to deliver justice. I've seen that sometimes justice doesn't come from a judge's bench, but from a small desk in a neighborhood where someone dares to say, 'I believe you, and I won't let you be silenced again.'" Evelyn Bell no longer had a code name. She was no longer E17, no longer an agent, but in a small, yellow-lit room where forgotten voices were heard again, she continued doing the job the whole system once failed to do: open the door and ask no questions. Have you ever been judged unfairly simply because no one ever truly listened to you? Have you ever quietly proven your worth, even when no one believed you could? If this story made you reflect on justice, silence, and courage, please share it. Somewhere out there, there are still people waiting for the chance to speak their truth. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue following stories that touch the heart and reignite faith in what is right. Thank you for taking the time to follow my channel. Your support and interest are powerful motivations that drive me to continue producing meaningful, high-quality content. In the days ahead, I'll bring you even more compelling stories and sharper perspectives, not just to entertain, but to speak to truths that deserve to be heard. Please keep watching, sharing, and spreading the message, because this journey always has room for those who believe in truth and human worth. Thank you so much.